Hey everybody, ABC 10 meteorologist Brenden Mincheff here with the latest on El Nino. The August update from the National Weather Service has come out, and we're going to talk about what the data shows, what the models suspect we may see as we go into this winter, and some historical precedent with this El Nino. So let's dive into it, and this is going to be a lot of data. We're taking a deep dive here. This is not a high-level overview. We're going to look pretty closely at the numbers and again at what we've seen in the past that may help to tell us what we may see this winter. First of all, the sea surface temperature anomalies. You can see El Nino in the deep red there, the Niño 3.4 index plus 2.31 degrees Celsius. Remember, anytime we go above half a degree Celsius, we move into El Nino territory. So we're talking about a very strong El Nino already at plus 2.31 and warming. We'll zoom in here. Off the coast of South America here, we see some water that is 5 degrees Celsius or more above normal, and there's a lot more underneath the sea surface that is still yet to arrive. That's going to help to boost this El Nino even further. So we are not anywhere near the peak of this El Nino. We're already starting to see some impacts here in California. Just strictly talking about sea surface temperatures here. Santa Monica water temperature 72.9 degrees Fahrenheit. For normal in August, 68.4. San Diego Bay water temperature 75.9. August normal 72.1. So above normal temperatures, above normal sea surface temperatures in Southern California. We don't see quite as much of that across Northern California. Monterey is about a couple degrees warmer than normal. Mendocino coast is about a degree warmer than normal. But we get so much of that cold water coming down from the north that it takes a lot longer for that warmer El Nino water to work its way up north. I'm not saying it's not going to happen. We just really aren't seeing it yet across the northern and central California coastlines. All right, here's the model for El Nino here. Model El Nino strength. Here's where we are right now. And here's what the likely peak will be. We just draw a straight line from that peak there. We're talking about potentially 4.5 degrees Celsius as a peak. That would be above normal temperature here. So that's just astounding. Just as a little perspective here, if you haven't been following along this whole time, normally this graph only goes up to 3. This El Nino is so strong, and it is going to be so strong that they've had to add 2 more degrees Celsius to the chart here. That's something else. And again, we are not near the peak here. You can see that there from the spaghetti models, but as you might expect also, that INSO phase probability, 100% chance of El Nino all the way through the 3-month window here of January, February, and March. It's not until we get to February, March, April, and then March, April, May that we start to see that El Nino maybe weakening just a little bit. But that's just the phase there, whether we're in El Nino, La Nina, or neutral conditions. Here's the actual strength probability here. So as we go deeper into the fall here and then into the rainy season, August, September, October, this 3-month window here, very likely to be a very strong El Nino. Even more likely by the time we get to September, October, November, December. Remember, El Nino's always measured in 3-month spans, 3-month intervals, which is why we're talking about 3 months at a time here. November, December, January, February is still very, very likely to be a very strong El Nino. Even as we get to January, February, March, we're still talking about what will likely be a strong or very strong El Nino. And it's not until we get into next spring of 2027, that we finally start to see that El Nino weakening just a little bit. So let's look at those ocean temperatures here. These are the sea surface temperatures, and this is a cross section. So what we're looking at here, the 0 line is the surface of the ocean. Then we're 100 meters deep, 200, 300, 400, 500 meters deep. So we're actually looking as if this is the surface and this is 500 meters deep. We're looking at a slice into the water, and all these little dots here, these little X's are buoys and buoy data. So this is actual data that we're getting from the ocean temperatures, not only at the surface, but as we go down in depth. And you can see it's definitely very warm, 30 degrees Celsius. But what we're more interested in is what are the sea surface anomalies or the sea temperature anomalies, right? Not just at the surface, but also below, because we want to see these things called Kelvin waves. What that is essentially just a circulation that moves water from Oceania and the eastern Pacific, excuse me, the western Pacific into the eastern Pacific. So the Kelvin wave moves kind of like this, and you can kind of see where that wave is with some of that cooler than normal water out there on the other side of the Pacific, but then this really, really warm water that's just beginning to reach the coast of South America, which would be right here. And so this water is going to upwell. And when I was talking about how sea surface temperatures are already off the coast of South America, 5 degrees Celsius or warmer than normal, and it's going to get warmer. This is why. This is how we can tell, because this wave, this water is moving up like this, and it will upwell off the coast of South America, and then it'll travel this way across the surface of the ocean. This all takes weeks to months, which is why we know that El Nino is going to get even stronger and will continue to be a very strong El Nino into winter. This little circle here is showing water that's 10 degrees Celsius warmer than normal. And remember, we only need to go half a degree Celsius warmer than normal to move into El Nino territory. This is likely a historic El Nino that's on the way, and it will likely be warmer than any recorded El Nino event in history. That's not hyperbole. That is a fact, that this has a good chance of being the strongest El Nino on record. In fact, I believe the number was something about 70% chance from NOAA and the National Weather Service that this El Nino will be the strongest on record. So what does that mean, right? I mean, of course, we're talking about ocean temperatures, El Nino usually wetter than normal. Here's what the climate models are suggesting. We'll go month by month here from September of 2026 to March of 2027, and we're looking at the precipitation anomaly here. We don't really need to go into the exact details of all this, but the bottom line is here, the chart tops out at blue for being very anomalous, right? Very wet. So anytime we see green, okay, we're talking about maybe wetter than normal conditions for September 26 and for California and into the Southwest. Yeah, it's looking maybe a little wetter than normal. Let's move into October here. All right, so a little bit split. This is usually what we see during these transition months, is that the southern part of the state and the Southwest usually a little wetter than normal, but then drier than normal across the Pacific Northwest. This is also a very typical setup for El Nino. Let's keep going. This is November now. Not a lot different here. We continue to see drier than normal, maybe much drier than normal across the Pacific Northwest, and maybe leaning a little bit wetter than normal across California. This is for November. Notice, though, we do see maybe quite a bit wetter than normal. So that blue color, remember, blue is the max. The chart doesn't go higher than blue. So we're seeing maybe quite a bit wetter than normal across parts of Mexico, across parts of the Gulf, and then into Florida and the southeast. Could see quite a bit of rain. Again, this is typical during El Nino, but remember, with this very strong El Nino, what we're basically doing is maxing out our expectations with El Nino. So wetter than normal, maybe much drier than normal, maybe much warmer than normal when we talk about temperature, right? But here we go. We know December, January, February for Northern California, the wettest months of the year. And check this out. Blue across Northern California and Central California, and those dark green to blue shades across Southern California. So we are maxing out the chart in terms of how anomalously wet may we be by the time we get to December. Very wet, according to these climate models. Now we're into January of 2027. Blue once again across the entire state of California. Let's move into February. And here we go, blue once again. So the 3 wettest months on average across Northern California, December, January, and February. All these models are suggesting all of those could be exceptionally wet months. We can't say for sure exactly how much rain that we're talking about, but what we are saying is that the signals are there, the climate signals are there, the El Nino signals are there, that we could be really pushing a historic winter in terms of rain. Let's move into March. March is usually when we start to see some tapering off of our rainfall, and yet we still continue to see us maxing out the precipitation anomaly chart here, blue across Central and Northern California in terms of rainfall. In terms of precipitation, I should be clear, because I say rain, we're going to definitely see a lot of rain. Obviously, we always do in the valley, right? We don't see snow in the valley. We usually see quite a bit of rain in the coastal range. In the high country, when we talk about the Sierra and Tahoe, that's when we normally see snow, not as much rain, but with El Nino, which we know is warm, right? Warmer than normal ocean temperatures. We know with climate change, the globe is warmer anyways. So we're talking about boosting our warmth that we may see this winter. We've been looking at precipitation anomalies. This is temperature anomaly. Now, this is for a 3-month window, December, January, February. But notice, it's not blue. Blue would be cooler than normal. We're talking about some orange to red shades here, indicating that we may be warmer than normal during our wettest months of the year. What does that mean? Well, for in the valley, it just means we may see less days maybe in the 50s and more days in the 60s, right? A little bit warmer than normal. But in the high country, it could mean higher snow levels, less snow falling. Now, the snow that does fall at the highest peaks and passes could be exceptional, but at the low to mid elevations, we may see less snow this winter and more rain. Each storm is going to be different, and certain storms may drop a lot of snow with low snow levels, and there may be others that are mainly rain. But with El Nino, and with this being such a warm El Nino event, it may mean that we have less snow even at the mid elevations. Maybe we have more snow above the passes, and once we get to pass level, maybe it's more rain this winter. We'll have to wait and see, but that's one of the signals that we're watching, along with, of course, the precipitation signals, which are indicating it may be very wet, but the temperature signals are important as well. Now, El Nino events in general for California are wetter than normal. All El Nino events, 111% of average, but the very strong events are 133% of average. These very strong El Nino events are when we can get some truly historic rainfall. Here's a few examples here. 1982 to 83 and 1997 to 98. If you've been a long-time resident in Northern California, you remember these years pretty well. The data, the history books remember these years very well, because for 82 to 83, look, it was the wettest water year on record for the San Joaquin Valley, for the Sacramento Valley, for the North Coast, for the Central Coast. It was the third wettest water year on record for the Southern California coast. 82 to 83, historically wet. 97 to 98, also historically wet with a lot of flooding. Fourth wettest water year on record for the Sacramento Valley. Third wettest on record for the San Joaquin Valley. Second for the Bay Area and Central Coast, and second wettest on record for Southern California. The El Nino that we are seeing out there right now is more in line with what we're seeing with what we saw in 82 and 83 and 97 to 98, and less in line with what we saw in 2015 to 2016. This was a slightly different type of El Nino, more centrally located. Yes, it was El Nino. Yes, it was still wet. I mean, honestly, a top 40 water year for Northern California. And when you have 134 years on record, top 40 definitely makes it one of the wetter ones, right? But for Southern California, it's one of the drier years, 134 years on record, and it was only maybe the 100th wettest year. That means obviously it was one of the drier years on record. But again, 2015-16, different setup. Yes, it was a very strong El Nino, but in general, a different setup than what we saw in 82 to 83 and 97 to 98. And what we see out there right now is more in line with those two very strong El Ninos. For Sacramento, these are numbers for Sacramento specifically. The wettest water years since 1950, which is 1950 when our records for El Nino began. Look at that, 82 to 83, almost 34.5 inches of rain fell in Sacramento, and then 97 to 98, another very strong El Nino, about 32 inches of rain fell. And yes, we can get some very wet winters. 2016 to 17 was a weak La Nina with 33 inches of rain that fell in Sacramento. But in terms of our top 5 wettest water years, look at that, very strong El Nino, very strong El Nino, and strong El Nino. There is definitely a correlation to wet winters and El Nino for Northern California. And I want to put this into perspective here because, like I said, the one that's out there right now that we see developing is in line with what we saw in 82 to 83 and 97 98. But it's also running ahead. This is a very cool chart with sea surface temperatures and El Nino anomalies, right? This is from cyclonicweather.com. Let me zoom in here. This deep purple line, this is El Nino 2026. That's where we are right now. The deeper red line, the kind of burgundy, that's El Nino 1997 right here. And these are the other very strong El Nino years. We are already ahead of historically strong El Ninos. And we know from the data that I just showed you that there's even warmer water out there. So this is not going to go down. It's going to continue to go up. We're likely to outpace all of these other El Ninos on record. Even the very strong ones of 97, 98, and 82 to 83, 2015, 16, we're already ahead of schedule, already warmer than those at this point in the year. And we know, as we just saw once again, that there's 10 degrees Celsius warmer than normal water that has yet to even move into this El Nino and boost it. So, in conclusion here, some winter expectations. I got 3 points here that I want to make. Number one, likely very wet. It's hard to say exactly how much rain we're going to see. I can't tell you. I cannot tell you how much rain we're going to see. But the numbers, both past and present, give us a good idea that this will likely be a very wet winter. As we saw with the historic numbers there, looking back at 82 to 83 and 97, 98, very strong El Niños have been wet for Northern California. And as we saw with the models, there's good model support for what will likely be a very wet winter. Number two, we touched on this a little bit, but I want to reiterate it again. It will likely be a more mild winter, probably not very cold for Northern California. It doesn't mean we won't have cold storms, we won't have snow, doesn't mean any of that. It just means if we have, say, 10 storms, it's likely maybe 7 or 8 of them will be warmer, and we'll only have a couple of pretty cold ones with some low snow levels. Again, that's just kind of, it's just throwing some numbers out there, but I'm just trying to give you some perspective here. Likely more mild. There's a number of reasons for that. Number one, climate change. It's a warmer world. That's just a fact, right? Climate change, the globe is warming. We know that we're having more warmer days and warmer nights, and we've talked a lot about that. So there's already a baseline shift of warming. But then with El Nino, like we saw, warmer ocean temperatures, right? So we're only boosting the warming that we're already seeing from climate change. And this also means some warmer storms. So these storms that are going to come in, these big atmospheric rivers that may bring us a lot of rain, they're not going to be cold storms. They're coming from the tropics, which are going to be very warm this winter. They're going to have a lot of rain with them, a lot of moisture that holds in the heat. So there's a number of things here that are going to make it a likely more mild winter, and those are just 3 of them. And we talked about this. One of those impacts that we may see, not just that it may be 60 degrees, 65 degrees, as opposed to maybe 55 degrees in December, but we may have some higher snow levels and less low snow. Again, doesn't mean we're not going to see snow. It just means we may see less of it, or the snow that we do see is going to be higher up the mountain. And number 3, this one doesn't impact us as much here in the valley, and certainly not in the high country, but coastal flooding is going to be a big deal this winter. Even if we don't, even when we're not talking about storms, it's going to be just a baseline bigger deal because the ocean levels are higher during El Nino. There's more water coming from the western Pacific into the eastern and the central Pacific. So literally the level of the sea is rising because of the amount of water that's on this side of the Pacific. But then we also know that with climate change, we're seeing higher sea levels as well. So just like with temperature, we're seeing a baseline shift of higher sea levels, and the El Nino, the very strong, likely very historic El Nino, is only going to boost those numbers that we're seeing, both in terms of temperature and in terms of higher sea levels. So high tide flooding, definitely going to be a concern across California. I mean, Highway 1 could be a pretty rough year. A pretty rough winter for Highway 1. And then it's going to be worse during storms as well because you're going to have higher sea levels. These storms are going to come in. It's going to push that water like we always see when we get big storms. You get those waves coming in, but because you're already dealing with sea levels that are higher, your coastal flooding opportunity and potential is going to be elevated. So coastal flooding, you got friends on the coast. If you're watching this, not in Sacramento or Northern California, you're out on the coast, just think about that as well. During storms, yes, but also not during storms. Just high tide flooding is going to be a concern as we go through this winter. So there's a lot of impacts here from this El Nino. It's not all doom and gloom. I'm definitely not trying to say that it's a bad thing. Look, a wet winter could be a very good thing, but it just comes with risks that we need to be ready for. Flooding is one of them, the coastal flooding, right? Snow could be a lot of snow at some high elevation. So just, it's important. I know it's still hot out there. I know it's still 90 degrees and here we are talking about rain and snow and winter, but it's just one of those things you got to be ready for. One of those ways you can do that, download the ABC 10 app. You can watch it free wherever you stream ABC 10. We've got a weather playlist there with extended forecasts, kind of like this one. We got extended specials where we dive into California's weather and water and climate, and we got explainers such as this one on El Nino. So we've got resources there for you, but just like any winter, it's good to be prepared. We don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but we have a pretty good idea it's going to be a pretty wet one. So go ahead and prepare now. Start thinking about what your winter may look like, especially if it's very wet, just like you do with hurricane season. If you lived in the southeast, be prepared for, if it was an active hurricane season, maybe if it was forecast to be an above average hurricane season, you take some preparations. You start thinking about it ahead of time, and that's all I'm asking you to do with this coming winter. I know we still got a ways to go before the rainy season gets here, but it could be a historic one. So be prepared and be sure to keep watching ABC 10 because we will keep you updated with the very latest. Thanks for watching.